Within the yoga system, there are various models of human personality. One of those models is called the Kosha model. The word kosha means covering or sheath. And this model of personality describes the human person as fundamentally a spiritual being, but covered by various densities of coverings around that spiritual self. You might think of it this way, that when you wake up in the morning, you immediately know yourself to be. You are awake and you are who you are. But gradually you accumulate various obligations and coverings of the day. You need to take a shower and get dressed. You need to think about what you're doing this morning. And in the process of doing that, you need to eat breakfast and go about your daily life. So all of these coverings, these things which we identify with as our daily life, they can be organized in 5 sheaths, koshas. These 5 coverings start with the sheath that's most obvious. The largest sheath around that central being is called the mano.maya kosha. The word anna means food. So the food that you eat becomes a covering your own body. And I have a friend who says that you'll know that you're recognizing the mano.maya kosha if, when you eat, it gets bigger. If you don't eat, it becomes smaller. The mano.maya kosha consists of the food that you eat translated into a human body. The word maya means consists of or is made of. Kosha is covering. Covering consisting of food. Within that sheath is a more subtle sheath. This more subtle layer of reality is called the prana.maya kosha. The prana.maya kosha is the sheath consisting of living energy. If you think for a moment about electricity, most of us have a vague idea that electricity means the flow of electrons, that electricity makes for energy, power, movement. But most of us have only a vague idea of how that actually happens. We trust that our 8th grade science class explained it right. But what kind of energy is it that parades before you as a living being who moves, who thinks, who speaks? That kind of energy is an entirely more profound energy. It's a living energy, prana. So we have within us a layer of self which is a living being, and that energy, prana.maya kosha, is the second sheath. The third sheath and the fourth consist of levels of mind. The third sheath in is called the mano.maya kosha. Mano is a word that originally had this form, manas. Manas means mind. And of course, the mind is a more subtle layer of ourself than the body, and more subtle than the flow of energy within us. It's the subtle aspect of ourselves, our thinking being. We are thinking beings. But the mano.maya kosha represents that method in which we ordinarily understand the world to be. I interact with that world through my senses, taste, touch, sight, smell, and hearing. I also operate in that world through my feet, through my arms. I can move and I can manipulate the world around me. The coordinator of these movements and sensory experiences is the manas, or the mano.maya kosha. Yet deeper yet is the vijnana.maya kosha. The word vijnana implies the ability to discriminate. The sheath within us, the ability within us to discriminate this from that, pleasant from unpleasant, right from wrong, virtue from vice. And our ability to do that requires a more subtle level of understanding in the world. It's not simply that I sense that ice cream is pleasant, but I decide how much ice cream will be valuable and helpful to me. So that sense of discrimination, that ability to perceive and discriminate one thing from another, is part of the human mind's capacity. But it's not simply the human mind. Now we are also beginning to think about the human heart. How do I know that something is valuable? I sense it within myself, in my heart and mind. That ability to recognize what is true and what is real, what is unreal and not wise, that discriminatory ability is called the maya kosha. There is one more sheath, more subtle yet. This more subtle sheath is called the maya kosha, a sheath consisting of bliss, sheath consisting of unalloyed joy. Where is this sheath and how is it recognizable to us? A teacher, the teacher who trained me in this model, said an interesting thing. He said that when one has exercised and done all of the great pleasures of life, there is one more pleasure that exceeds all the ones that we try to grasp with our hands and eat with our mouth and have with our bodies. And that great pleasure is sleep. So the maya kosha represents that bliss which lies unconsciously within us in the presence of our own being, deep at sleep. We have to think about that a little bit. These can be divided into words. Our familiar, ordinary body, the maya kosha, is the outermost sheath, or the gross sheath of the body. The breath, mind, and discriminatory facilities are called the subtle body. But there is a body that lies within us deep and quietly, existing just as a sense of pure joy at being. Not the self yet, but getting close to the self. And that self, that subtlemost being of our personality, is the maya kosha, the causal body. The body which persists even when I sleep and am not aware of it. And perhaps the body, if you want to think of it this way, the body that persists over great expanses of time and being. That inner being, our self, next to the core of our self, is called the maya kosha. So what is it that lies within that? Deeper yet? The atman, pure being, the self within the self. And that inner self is the goal of spiritual life. To know it, to be it, to sense its presence in us, and to recognize that in it we are aware, and we are joyful, purely joyful. That great experience is said to be the experience of self. The kosha model helps us see the direction that we're moving in. But it's not that we are trying to divest ourselves of these layers, but that we are trying to make them more transparent. If I can eat well in a balanced way so that I wake up pleasantly in the morning, looking forward to another day and another breakfast, lunch, and dinner. If I can exercise with my body so that it remains healthy and strong. If I can breathe deeply so that my breath no longer becomes confused with negative emotion, stress, and pain. And particularly if I can organize my thoughts and discrimination so that I find myself moving in the direction of my own heart. Gradually I begin to sense that there is a deep joy in me, and beyond that joy is my own sense of being. So, with that in mind, you might consider from time to time how you're doing with your kosha model. That's the idea of yoga, is to engage with ourselves at every level of being. And we can do that through the practice of yoga.